I never imagined that a simple game could destroy everything in my life. It was just an evening with friends where my brother, my boyfriend, and I played Never Have I Ever. Who would have thought that one careless comment from Connor would make me lose the person I love most? I can't understand why things turned out this way. And I wonder if I'm being too harsh by not being able to forgive him. It feels like my world just collapsed. Connor and I didn't have an easy childhood. When I was just 7 years old, my parents began to change. They seemed to live only to control everything in the family, and each of us had to endure their strictness. Although there were times I felt lost and lacked affection, I always tried to stay strong because I was the older sister, and I had to take care of my brother. Connor was always a quiet, introverted child, very sensitive. I knew he faced challenges from a young age, but I was always there to protect and comfort him. However, one day, everything changed. When Connor turned 16, my parents discovered a secret he had kept hidden for so long. He was gay. It was undoubtedly a huge shock for the whole family. My mother cried, and my father became furious. But what broke my heart the most was how they handled it. They didn't ask questions or try to understand him. They quickly made a harsh decision. You can't live here anymore. Everything happened so fast, without hesitation. Connor was kicked out of the house just because of the truth about his sexuality. I was in shock, unable to believe that my family could treat him like that. Though I was deeply hurt, I couldn't sit idly by and watch my brother be cast out into the streets. I decided to bring him to live with me, even though I was only 20 and wasn't fully independent. I had to take on extra jobs to support us, but at no point did I think of abandoning him. Connor was my only sibling, and I loved him unconditionally. I believed that no matter what happened, I would always be there for him. Day by day, we overcame our struggles together. Connor gradually became stronger, but there were still nights when he lay next to me, silently crying over what had happened to him. I always tried to make him feel safe and loved. I couldn't imagine what he must have felt being rejected by his own family, but I knew I would never treat him like that. I was the only family he had left, and I would never let him feel alone. However, throughout those years, I couldn't stop feeling a sense of resentment, even anger toward our parents. I had worked hard to make things stable for the two of us, but I could never forget that they had abandoned my brother just because of one part of who he was, without even trying to understand or accept him. The long nights of seeing my brother grow up in the shadow of a family's lack of love made me even more determined that I would never abandon him and would protect him for the rest of my life. Still, I realized that no matter how much I cared for him, the fact that he always felt the absence of love and acceptance from our family would always be a deep wound in his heart. And I didn't know if we could ever heal that wound. When Connor invited me to his birthday party, I didn't think much of it. He had invited me several times before, but I always declined because I felt too old to join in on drinking games with a bunch of young people. However, this time, seeing my brother so excited, I couldn't bring myself to disappoint him, so Hunter and I decided to join. We hadn't had fun like this in a long time, and honestly, I needed some lightheartedness to escape the tension in my life. The party was going well. Connor and his friends had prepared plenty of food and drinks, and there were no shortages of games. After a few rounds of chatting, someone suggested we play Never Have I Ever, a popular drinking game where each person says something they've never done, and those who have done it must drink. I was hesitant but joined in, knowing I didn't quite fit in with the younger crowd. Everything was normal until Connor suddenly said, "Never have I ever cheated before." I looked around and everyone's attention turned toward me. At first, I didn't understand why I felt so uncomfortable, but then I realized Connor was bringing up my past mistake. It had been so long since I thought about it. I had made a huge mistake in my youth, when I was a naive girl who didn't think things through and hurt someone I loved. That relationship ended in pain. And I didn't regret it because it taught me a powerful lesson. Since then, I've always tried to be a better person, someone who would never repeat such a mistake. And yet, that past was being dragged back up. I remained silent, not drinking, not saying anything, just looking at Connor, trying to stay calm. But then, unexpectedly, he spoke up. You're not drinking? You know you cheated on your ex, right? His words hit like a slap in the face. All eyes were on me. My heart sank. I didn't want that past to resurface, especially not in front of Hunter. I turned to look at him, and I saw his expression change. Hunter didn't say anything. He just silently stood up and walked out of the room. I was in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. He was no longer the man who had looked at me with love and understanding. His face was blank, distant. I felt utterly lost. The alcohol wasn't enough to numb the sting of disappointment and confusion. I rushed after Hunter, wanting to explain everything, but he wouldn't listen. He didn't want to hear it, didn't want to understand. To him, my past mistake of cheating was unforgivable. I understood the pain he was going through, but I couldn't understand why he wouldn't give me a chance to explain. After all, it was just a stupid teenage mistake. I had learned from it and grown. In the end, Hunter wouldn't come back. He broke up with me right there, with no further explanation. In that moment, I felt like everything I had built with him was shattered. The happiness we had shared seemed to vanish in an instant. As for my brother, even though he seemed genuinely regretful and apologized, I couldn't bring myself to. My heart was just filled with hurt and emptiness. After Hunter left the room, I stood there, not knowing what to do. It felt like time had stopped, and everything around me became hazy. All the sounds disappeared, and I could only feel a suffocating weight in my chest. I looked at Connor, and his once excited eyes were now filled with deep regret. He didn't say anything, just stood there with a tired expression, as if he knew he had done something terrible that couldn't be undone. I ran after Hunter, offering no explanation, just trying to hold on to whatever I could. But Hunter didn't stop. He didn't turn back. As I rushed to call his name, his steps grew farther away, like he had already made up his mind to let go. The disappointment overwhelmed me as I realized that we could never go back to what we were. All I could do in that moment was watch him walk away, unable to stop him. I stood there, my hands hanging limply at my sides, feeling empty. Everything felt meaningless. The happy moments I had shared with Hunter seemed to evaporate into a pain I couldn't comprehend. I tried to reason with myself that it was just a mistake from my youth, that I had learned from it and wasn't that person anymore. But the reality was a shock, a painful rejection I couldn't accept. Connor approached me, his eyes full of concern. "Sis, are you okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant, but I couldn't face him right now. I couldn't look him in the eye without feeling the pain of my own heartache. All those years of protecting him, caring for him, now felt meaningless. Not because he wanted to hurt me, but because his careless words had pushed me into an irreversible situation. I just shook my head, unable to speak. My little brother, the one I had treated like my own child, now felt so distant, not because he meant to hurt me, but because he didn't think before he spoke. The feeling was unbearable. I couldn't accept that my own brother had destroyed the most important relationship of my life. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to understand that he was just a kid, lacking thought. But the other part of me felt too much pain to let it go. He apologized, but could those words heal the wound I was carrying? I didn't know. The emptiness still lingered, and I couldn't convince myself that things would ever be okay again. I walked out of the room, heading straight for the kitchen, then stood looking out the window, trying to calm my emotions. The endless nights seemed to replay in my mind. In that moment, I wondered if I could ever recover from this shock. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted and empty. I hadn't slept at all. My mind was racing with everything that had happened. Connor's words still echoed in my ears, and what Hunter said, or rather what he didn't say, still left me breathless. I knew I couldn't keep living in this pain, but how was I supposed to escape it? After waking up, I walked into the living room and saw Connor sitting silently on the couch, his head hung low. I knew he was waiting for my response, knowing he had hurt me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. Why was this happening? Why did he say those words? I thought I had done enough for him, given him all my care, and now he was the one who had taken away the most important person in my life. Connor looked up and began speaking, his voice full of regret. "Sis, I didn't think before I spoke. I just wanted everyone to have fun, but I didn't realize the consequences. I'm really sorry. I mean it." I just stood there, silent, unable to respond. Every apology felt like a knife to my heart. Was I being too cold-hearted for not forgiving him? But how could I forget this pain? I didn't want to blame Connor, but I couldn't hold back the anger rising inside me. I wanted to scream, to make him understand that his words didn't just hurt me. They destroyed everything I had built with Hunter. I didn't know how much longer I could stand in this whirlwind of conflicting emotions. After a long silence, I decided to pick up the paper I had prepared earlier that morning. "You have to leave, Connor," I said, my voice not strong but not weak either. "I can't live like this anymore." My brother's face changed instantly. He stared at me, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "Sis, you want me to leave?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You're kicking me out?" I turned my face away, unable to look at him. "It's not that I don't love you, but I can't live under this roof, with these memories, with this pain. You need to go." I couldn't do anything else. After all, he had hurt me in a way that couldn't be fixed, and I couldn't keep living with this internal conflict. Connor stood up and walked toward me, his eyes red. "Sis, I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong, I really regret it. Please don't do this to me. I'll leave, but please don't hate me." I felt like my heart was being torn into pieces. I could only shake my head, my eyes wet but unable to cry. He walked out of the room without looking back, and I stood there, empty. The pain kept surging inside me. I had made this decision, but I didn't know if I could handle the emptiness that came with it. After Connor left, I felt like I was surrounded by a dark cloud. The emptiness I felt was indescribable. I had lost Hunter, and now I had kicked my brother out. I looked around the empty room, the cold air mirroring my current state of mind. Everything suddenly felt too quiet, too lonely. That day, I did nothing. I didn't want to go out. Didn't want to see anyone. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the chaotic thoughts in my head pass by. I thought about Hunter, about all the wonderful moments we shared, and now everything had fallen apart. I blamed myself, wondering if there was anything I could have done differently to save our relationship. But I also couldn't forget what had happened. Every time I thought about it, the pain would resurface, stabbing at my heart. After a while, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Connor. "Sis, I'm really sorry. I didn't know what I did. If we could, I'd like to talk more. I can't let things end like this." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. I knew Connor was truly regretful, but I also knew I couldn't go back. What had happened couldn't be easily erased. I bit my lip, not replying, leaving the phone to lie on the table. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, drinking tea, and thinking about everything. I felt like I had lost everything valuable. While I understood that Connor was just a kid and didn't mean to hurt me, the pain he caused was too deep for me to forgive immediately. The love I had for him was still there, but the sense of betrayal was too overwhelming. As for Hunter, I didn't know if I could ever heal the deep wound in his heart. He had left without any explanation, which made me feel like a complete failure. As the night settled in, I couldn't keep these emotions inside any longer. I needed to do something to change everything, to regain some balance in my mind. But how? I didn't know where to start. I couldn't forget Connor's words, and I couldn't erase the feeling of loss from not being able to keep Hunter. I only knew that everything had changed, and perhaps I would have to live with it forever. The next day, I decided to clean up the house, trying to create a new space to move on from the past. Every item I picked up, everything I moved, reminded me of happier times, only to be followed by the pain creeping into every corner. I couldn't escape my feelings, but at least I hoped I could start over, even though everything would never be the same again.